Let's go ahead and convene our April meeting of the TAC. I'm sorry, it's May 2nd. We had May Day yesterday, so it's May 2nd, please, guys. It's May 2nd. We'll begin our PAC meeting. We have a quorum now, so let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Hand over your heart. Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Josh, this is your first time. Are you ready to do roll, or you want me to do it?
I'll do it.
Okay. Roll call.
Okay. Ed Imson. Patricia Quist.
Pat, the TAC meeting went long, and she's dropping off her husband. We'll be back momentarily.
Tim Carroll. Present. Nick Panzer.
Present.
Renee Westelusk. Here. West Katzenstein. Judy Decker. Here. Raj Janalagada.
Present.
Don Zadiba.
Here.
John Kersey.
Here.
David Janik.
Here.
Joshua Nugent. Present. James Maurer. Lyle Fisher. Ryan Klausch. And last but definitely not least, Lorelei Oviatt.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum, and I know we have two more coming back.
I've got
West.
Got West.
West is now present. Pat should be on her way. I'm not sure about the others. I do know Lyle Fisher is out of town on a vacation and a family reunion trip, so he will not be here this evening. I think we also have everyone else here who's going to make it. There may be at least one more, as I talked about. Okay, with that, we'll open public comment for any issue or item that is not on our agenda, but under our purview, and we will have the members of the public will have the opportunity to comment on each agenda item during the time it is up in front of the committee. So any public comment? No public comment seen. We'll proceed to item number 3, review and approve the minutes for February, March, and April PAC meetings. We have in front of us, but delivered recently, the final copy of the minutes for February and March, so we will take up. We have not had time to do the complete review of them, and they were both very lengthy meetings. So we will review those and take over the month and take the approval of those two up to start at our meeting, next PAC meeting, which will be in June. Actually, I'll give the date later. So that leaves us to the April meeting minutes, item 3C. And we have Josh has taken over doing the minutes and made a good stab at the first time doing it. And thank you very much for taking that on. Comments from folks before we hear a motion?
Yes, my name was not included in the roll call, although it's... Speak in the microphone. Sorry. I don't even know if it's on. My name was not included in the roll call.
And I also think I misspelled your name a couple times.
Yes, you did.
So, but IE.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, other comments?
I submitted some corrections. Are they going to be incorporated?
Yeah, my idea, David, was because it was the first time, was to make some of the changes that Renee had suggested. They were things like I didn't list that there was a quorum. I didn't list a couple of the times, just kind of some Robert's Rules of Orders, which I got some fun time reading over the last couple of days. So if it's okay with you guys, I would like to have that one go back out. And timing-wise, I'm thinking of trying to get the meeting minutes out on Monday, like this coming Monday. So then there's time to review.
I think that's a good plan.
I could send out the revised minutes and today's minutes on Monday to give people plenty of time to review both of them before we can approve both next meeting, if that works.
I think that works. Let me make a suggestion also. What I think we want to do, and we're trying to get a balance between what has been almost a near transcript and something that might be too brief, but it's less critical that we have real detail in depth now that we have a videotape historical record of these, audio and video. So what I would suggest is, I assume you all are reading the PAC reports that I put together next week, and then report to the committee, to the board at the meeting that follows ours by exactly 2 weeks each year. This year, or this month, it'll be 2 weeks from today. And that summarizes the major items under each agenda item. And what I would suggest is we take the methodology that you have delineating the times that those agenda items occurred, the folks that were commenting, merge those two documents, and you have the April copy of the report that was delivered. You merge those two documents, and the only thing then that would be needed to be added to it were motions made, who moved it, who seconded it, and what the vote totals were. And with those three, the merger of those two and the adding of that information, I would suggest that that would suffice for our minutes.
I agree. I think it's also important to make us more relevant, to get this with the timestamps in front of the GA board as quick as possible, because then I think that's going to give us the most relevancy, is if they can go back and look at our current meeting before their next meeting.
Right. So. And for the public, I think it's important the time of the tape, that folks can find it on the videotape. I have had folks come up to me saying, I wasn't here, but I watched it.
Turn it up.
They will be able to reference, when they look at the minutes, they'll be able to find a topic that they were particularly interested in and be able to reference immediately when that occurred, where to go to on the tape to get that, to save themselves time. So how does the board or the committee feel about that proposal?
You're saying to merge your
Merge my report
with
his, and then add the details required by Robert's Rules of Order, vote totals, who voted ayes and nays, et cetera, motions, all those things, and that would suffice now that we have a legal record in the videotape.
Are you proposing the minutes be more concise? I think this is Josh done a real good job of really capturing the flow of the meeting, and if he's willing to work that hard, I think it really benefits us.
Yeah, I think that's why I think they ought to be merged. And so what he will be doing in essence is taking the report and then with the tape, noting when those things occurred, adding the necessary details about who made the motions, who seconded it, what the vote was, so that we're legally have a legal minutes, and that would take the most benefit of each, reduce the time required to do this whole thing, because you really have two people working on the minutes then. You have my report and you have Josh doing that portion of it. It also frees him up thought-wise for a little bit more contribution in this meeting, because it's very hard to take these notes, and even with the audio recordings. It's easier now with a video than it was with audio. I agree. So that's the proposal, and do we think that's the way we ought to do the minutes from now on in this new venue?
That's okay, except sometimes people make comments that I think should be included because I think they're important for future reference and going forward. So I don't know how you're going to sift that out.
I did do a lot of reading on Robert's Rules of Orders, and one of the things it did say is that the minimum requirement, and actually one of the recommendations, is to just list the items discussed in the motions that were made, because otherwise, and I actually felt some of this pressure myself, and so I feel for Renee, is I'm left determining, both for members of the public and other committee members, which statements that they made were important, that needs highlighted, and which ones weren't.
Well, maybe when we make a statement, we should say so you could include it. I tend to go back to the minutes and read them to see if there's something in there that I think, we were supposed to carry forward, or one of us was supposed to carry forward. I'm not just talking about your minutes. And so I'm suggesting that if a PAC member makes a comment on something that he would like in the minutes, he or she, they should say so, and that they should be included.
I would agree. I'd say
Okay.
two other pieces to that, Judy, is I took on the responsibility of doing the report and giving that report at the GA meeting. And in
Understood.
so doing, I take that decision on what are the important things that I think should be in there, but I may miss some too.
Yeah,
So that's why you combine them, the two. If he gets it done early as he proposes, he can send the draft out to us and folks can say, hey, here's an
Sure.
additional important one that you noted the time. Please summarize what the content of that issue was.
sure.
Okay. So I think we have an agreement that that's the way we're going to go with minutes. This doesn't require a vote. Okay. All right. Any comment from the public on our minutes housekeeping?
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Derek Hoffman from Meadowbrook. My first comment is I thought the minutes looked good, and I appreciate Josh's efforts and Renee's in the past as well. But as to the discussion that you just had, I don't know that I fully understand it, but I would suggest that since today's agenda is just approval of the prior minutes, that if you're going to take a different approach in your process for how the minutes are prepared or approved or presented, I'd suggest you make that its own item at the next meeting. I would suggest that you don't decide a total course change on how you prepare this important process.
I don't know that
today.
it's a course change. I appreciate your comment, Derek, but we've done this a couple times with regards to do we have too much in the minutes? Do we not have enough? We've talked about it last. We had the same discussion 2 times ago. Now that we were going to be at this venue, when Josh volunteered, that we could in fact shorten the minutes with references to the videotape. Approval of the minutes is the subject, and what we've said is that we're going to modify the process slightly and approve them next time. I think that's within Robert's Rules of Order unless the board or the committee disagrees.
Well, I hear what you're saying. All I'm saying is you may recall, and I don't want to go back to those days any more than you do. We had a long, many months discussion about how minutes ought to be prepared and approved, and I don't think we want to go back to that. All I'm saying is I recognize the need to get timely information in front of the board from the PAC. I've made many recommendations in the past on how that could be done to support you in this process. I'm just saying be thoughtful in how you decide your process ought to be before you make a decision in how you do it. That's
I think
all.
so. I think
Thank you.
what we're doing is a very slight modification to what Renee had been doing. It's actually making it a little bit easier. But what I would suggest is we will now have all 3 of these minutes again on our plate at the next meeting, and we will have the opportunity at that time as a group and as the public to say, does this new format meet the need? So it's a test, and in that sense, we could write the agenda item to say approve the new method. I think that would account for your comment, would it not?
I think it might, and I just offered it as an observation today.
Appreciate
I share
it.
your interest in making sure the PAC information gets to the board timely. I just want to make sure that you all understand that the process is important too, that you decide upon.
I appreciate it,
Yeah,
and
thank
thank
you.
goodness we are well beyond the point where we could hardly get an agenda item, let alone something important to talk about. So I think we've got a much better relationship with the GA and how we work our topics overall.
I have a question regarding, you're saying, like Judy said, that if a member is requesting that a comment be in the minutes, does that include members of the public? Because I've found it helpful listening to the members of the public, and sometimes a lot of their stuff is relevant and important, and I guess, like having members of the public's information or questions left out.
Well, I
Because
understand it.
we don't have a large attendance coming
Right.
to our meetings, and so I think it's important to let the members of the public
I would agree, and I think what
be
we've
recorded in the minutes, because they might have some really relevant things. I've learned a lot from the public.
Me too. And I think the PAC report summaries have often had the public's comments in them. And our process that we just talked about would take into account that any one of us can say, as well as a member, can you please, I think that's one that we ought to put in there. That's part of the review process.
comment.
Pat?
Just real quick comment. Kind of like a disclaimer at the beginning of every meeting. It would be, I think, I like the fact that we have the video and the written minutes. You could just simply say something quick, like, please state your name if you have a comment to make. Let us know that you want it in the minutes before you make the comment if you're public. The rest of us ought to have a memory better than that. And I think that would be excellent. That reminds everybody that we have video as well as written. So if they just watch the video, maybe they would remember, oh, well, they could go read the minutes too. So that's all.
An observation here. I think that one of the challenges of trying to write down everybody's comments is they may be misinterpreted. And I like the idea of saying there was a comment made about a subject area, and you can go listen to it online, and then it's not a transcription problem, or there may not be if there's a problem, the person taking the minutes understanding something that I said and I didn't say it clearly. So to me that's an advantage in what we're doing now. Now I suppose if someone did want their remarks specifically stated, then they could request that like you've suggested.
Absolutely. And we've done that with attachments that folks have requested, both members and public, after we got through that early fight that we went through. Earl's been patient. Earl.
Yes, I'm listening to everybody. Earl Wilson, a member of the PAC, but I'm speaking for myself. I like that. We're doing video. You've got a timestamp. If you don't know the person, you want to hear what they got to say, the name's there, the topic's there. Hit the timestamp, it's done. I was amazed when I opened that in my email yesterday. So anyway, thank you. I like it.
Thank you. Don.
The Groundwater Authority actually went through these same growing pains with minutes. I'm very familiar with it because Lauren takes the minutes. And it went through several iterations where people say there's too much, there's not enough. So if you read the minutes, what you see is if someone makes a comment, she just writes, so-and-so commented on this issue. And to that point, it's recorded. So if somebody's interested in what they said, they can go refer either to the audio or the video, whatever, and actually see what they said. If you start writing down everything people say verbatim, it gets really bogged down. And so just for consideration, obviously the PAC can do what they want with the minutes, but the GA board decided to go in that direction. Just refer to people mentioning who commented on that specific agenda item and leave it at that.
I really like that suggestion.
Okay, what I would suggest is I think we agreed to a path forward. Let's let Josh take the direction we just gave him, put one together, look at it next time, see that it meets our needs. I'll adjust the title of the item so that we can make a formal change in the process with consideration from all of us and the public. And I think there are valid points on both sides of this. I, for myself, like the more streamlined version, but it's for this group with the public's input to decide. So let's look at what Josh comes up with next time. We may need to tweak it just a little bit and then move forward from that point.
Since we're not voting on any of the minutes, I can't quite remember whether it was the March minutes or the February minutes, or perhaps both of them, had an area where there's a blank line, because I think Renee couldn't tell what was discussed, or
Yeah, because I hadn't had time to listen to the video.
Okay.
The audio. I'm sorry, not the video, because we didn't have the video, but the audio, and I was going by my notes.
Understood, but I wonder if it would be, since it's mentioned in there, would it be possible, with the help of some of the rest of us, to fill in those blanks?
Yeah, well, I just passed out the updated ones.
Okay.
And I don't think
I didn't have a chance
I
to
filled
read it.
in all the blanks.
Oh, good for you.
I spent all day. That's why I wasn't at the TAC meeting.
Oh, good for you. Thank you,
You missed a
Renee.
long one,
Yeah,
but
you
productive. Okay.
did. Okay.
So with that, any other public comment? Okay, we'll move to item number 4 and get into the meat of the meeting. Allocation status review and update. There is a report in front of everybody.
Yeah.
This time, unlike the other times, it wasn't on his stationery for his attorney firm or law firm. It was, in fact, an email summary since the meeting had occurred just last Friday, and he wanted to get this out to us as soon as he could, so this went out to the committee on Tuesday. And most are aware that what transpired prior to this is the attorney meetings, which had been attempting to negotiate the boundaries of a tentative allocation structure that had been going on for 4 or 5 meetings, reached an impasse at that point. And the fact that they had reached an impasse, they were informing, and vice versa, the technical advisory committee and the ad hoc modeling committee that was making recommendations together with what the attorneys were throwing out as options and exploring the boundaries of, and we fell behind schedule on getting out the GSP. And the next model scenario run number 3 of the 4 that were funded and authorized out of the available funding. Scenario number 3 at that time was intended to be a rough guess or agreement as to what the allocation might look like going forward, and scenario number 4 was to be tweaks to that. Since there was no framework for an agreement reached, and we were still working through some technical difficulties, and we still have a January 31st, 2021 date to deliver a GSP to DWR, we were now beyond the critical path inside the POA&M to reach that, and especially if we intended to have late summer public hearings on the path forward, supported by some level of modeling. So there was a meeting, and in fact, the last attorneys meeting just before our meeting, they did not meet, and we reported that last time. It was also reported at the GA 2 weeks ago, and at the GA they had a closed session meeting to decide how to proceed forward and try to get back on schedule, and they scheduled one more attorneys meeting that I'm aware of certainly, and it was this one last Friday on the 26th of April, and these notes reflect a summary out of that. And it reflects that we still have an impasse, but in order to get out of the impasse, a proposal was made for a particular scenario that was intended to, and I'll quote the one part of this that's really key, the core principle of this option would be to afford the opportunity for agricultural uses to continue for a prescribed period of time in order to generate agreement and settle the issue of allocation and pumping rights. The other characteristics go forward here, and it is a forcing function, and clearly stated that that's what it was, to take action immediately and begin to bring the basin into balance while we work through to a better allocated decision. A second option, should this option not be accepted or no other alternatives be provided in a timely fashion, was called the nuclear option, and we'll discuss those later. It's summarized on the second page of the email, and it talks about an option which would eliminate all pumping upon DWR approval of the implementation plan except for municipal use, which would include de minimis residential wells, 86% pumping by the water district, and domestic mutual water companies serving residences, and the city's overlying pumping and pumping on the Navy base. And it is further understood that this approach would be the one most likely to generate litigation, and that understanding is the basis for the suggestion made that the first option specified above be carefully considered as the basis for settlement. The first item was the one that I talked about. So that's a little bit of an explanation of what this letter said out of that meeting, and the GA has selected and directed 3 scenarios to be run because there was a volunteer of additional monies to fund additional runs beyond the 2 remaining runs that were funded out of the original grant. And so there are 3 runs that are being run consecutively right now. We will talk more on this issue under our item upcoming on review of the POAM items. It's item number 6. Number 49 specifically is the modeling scenario management actions, and we will go through those 3 there, and I will match up which 2 of those 3 match with the 2 that are mentioned in this document, because it wasn't entirely clear to me when the water resource manager presented that at the TAC, and we clarified that. So what I'd suggest is we can talk about specific items in here, but it may be more relevant to have that conversation during the scenario discussion under item number 6. Any specific questions from the committee members or comments or observations on the attorney report, which led to and has led to essentially where we are sitting with the 3 scenarios that are being run as we speak?
Was there any discussion of the third model run, the so-called white paper alternative at the TAC? Any more background?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No, there was, I shouldn't say absolute no. There was some clarification of some minor differences in the exact drawdown. Was it 11,000 feet? Was it? They actually made it 7,650, and we'll talk about that when we get to this point. Because it actually drew out the time required for the modeling. So they simplified it a little bit, but we'll talk about that under number 6. That'll explain a little better. Hopefully we'll have a lot more clarity about this after we get through number 26. Now, we do not have Water Resource Manager had to go back tonight, so we don't have Steve to answer the questions. I will give you my best interpretation from that and other discussions I had.
I would note that the paper says that they are supposed to meet again on the 23rd of May.
Yes, and in fact, I think it's the last sentence in this document itself. The next meeting will occur in Keith Lemieux's office at 10 a.m. on Monday the 23rd, and just above that it said Meadowbrook offered that they would have another scenario to present at that time. Any other questions? Any public comments on this before we get, we'll be discussing and be able to come back to the relationship of this to number 6 under number 6.
I just have a question. Is this leading to the final agreement? Is what they're saying in this document?
Rephrase your question, please.
Is this going to lead to the final agreement regarding how to approach the allocation issue?
It doesn't. It's open-ended with that respect. We would all have hoped that we'd gotten closer than we are by this time, and the proposal to go through these 2 was made. The decision was made at the closed session prior to the GA meeting on the 6th, 2 weeks ago, and written up and presented in this fashion. This is a summary of the meeting where that message was delivered to the attorneys. And it was, as written here, and I read the one sentence, this is intended to precipitate as best they can to get to precipitate a negotiated decision, or at least the bounds and framework around it. But we could not wait. The GA could not wait anymore. They had to begin the modeling runs, and they began them, and we'll talk more about that in number 6, which sequence, what's in them a little bit more, but there isn't In the last two, there isn't a lot of detail yet.
Okay.
So if they can, if we could arrive, their intent is if we could arrive at agreement, at least a framework for an agreement to start on, we'd love it. We would all like it. But that was always known that it may not happen, and it may, in fact, as I read, precipitate litigation.
So basically, there's two options they're listing, and then possibly a third.
We'll talk about the other scenarios that are being run, and there are variations around those. Each time you make a run, you learn more about some of the impacts of that run, the effects both in local geographical areas as well as the basin as a whole.
Are they wanting our input
We're free to
on
give them
this?
our input.
On this tonight, or
We could.
will this come up for discussion again before? Because I think people need time to reflect on it.
Well, that's what I would say. Ask the question again at the end of number 6, because we will all know a little bit more when we talk about number 6 and the specific path forward that's going to happen over the next 4 weeks, I think, if I got the timeline correctly. And so we always will have the opportunity. Remember, we agreed 2 months ago or 3 months ago when we started the attorney meetings that we knew some of them would be very soon before our meeting. We would get a written summary and any tasking from Mr. Markman. We would be allowed to assemble individual comments for the next few days and get them in so that we could go back to him and make comments and review those at the next meeting as well. And we are free to make comments at this meeting, but we as a committee reserve the right, because many times they didn't come in until inside the public deadline for posting, that we had the right to comment on these in writing individually to me, so we don't violate the Brown Act. I send each input forward into the water resource manager and Mr. Markman if it was a separate one.
The way I understand these scenarios is they're kind of straw man concepts on how to manage the groundwater that will be modeled. It doesn't necessarily mean any of these will be adopted. But
No,
the way
it
we
doesn't.
explore
It doesn't.
ideas is to come up with some ideas and run them through the model and see who salutes, basically. So one of these could end up being the final allocation, but I think it's just exploring ideas and seeing where it leads. And that's the context I personally put them in.
At this point, yes. We'll have more on that exact topic under number 6. This is an attempt, obviously, to get off the top dead center with the attorneys and get to where we have to begin runs and come up with a credible path forward with the deadline that we have. And I'm using the we as the GA itself, since we're an advisory committee for it. Okay, no public comment? Okay, let's go. To item number 5, and we'll get to 6 real quick, because we do not have a draft GSP chapter for some of the reasons I just stated. And in fact, what they committed to at the TAC meeting was that they split what was Chapter 2 into 2 sections, and they're working on both Chapter 2 and the new 3. And Stetson plans to have available to present in 2 weeks Section 3 to us, so that we will be able to go over it at our next PAC meeting in 4 weeks. That's the intent out of what was stated at the TAC meeting. It was unclear to me whether we would get both Chapter 2 or Chapter 3 at that time. Those of you that were at the TAC meeting, did you get that? Any more clarity on that?
I believe we will get. I believe we will get Chapter 3 first, and then as soon as they can, I believe we'll get Chapter 2.
That's what I understood. I just
Yeah.
didn't know if they were going to try to get 2 at the same time.
Well, considering all that they have on their plate from us, I don't think they'll make it, because now they have all these model runs to do that they are doing directly.
Yeah, They have a lot on their plate.
And they
are
do have other
transcribing.
clients, by the way.
Yes. Other comments?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand from a schedule perspective, what was the schedule date for Chapter 2 and Chapter 3?
It's in the poem. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I don't carry it around. So
They're behind. They are behind.
Okay.
And that's what's precipitating the fact that they had to start modeling. It takes roughly 10 days to run a model.
All right.
Roughly.
All right.
Any comments from the public on agenda item number 5? Okay, agenda item number 6. I guess everybody wanted to get to it. Okay, I'll give you the background that Water Resource Manager gave, and then we'll get into each of the 3 scenarios, and I will match them to the 2 scenarios mentioned in Mr. Markman's letter, and then we can have the discussion. Okay, and let's see, do we have, Gary, can we present this to the public behind me? Was that a no? Oh, we have to have a clicker? Can I get the clicker? I'll get it. Thank you. Am I smarter than the clicker?
Sorry.
How do we bring it up, Gary? There it is. Okay. You can either watch this behind me, and the public certainly is free to, or you have the hard copy of this sent out yesterday, I believe it was. Go to... So just as a reminder, I got it. Thank you. Just as a reminder, we have had 3 runs to date out of what was going to be a total of 5 runs that were funded. The first one was a baseline run, and then we had management scenario 1, management scenario 2, and we should have started management scenario 3 a few weeks ago. We have volunteered funding to do 2 more at least, potentially 3 more, and we'll talk about that at the end. The impasse was reached. We'll talk about the issues surrounding the impasse that are being discussed, why the impasse is at that point, and the pathway forward. There's 2 paths, a legal path and a technical path through the scenarios and the management and working with the TAC, and of course we're part of the review process for the policy in each case. Okay. So what we're going to talk about essentially, I'll summarize what Steve Johnson, the Water Resource Manager, laid out as the path forward in coordinating those 2 paths, the technical and legal action groups, which largely Stetson is heading the technical with the PACs or with the tax support, and Mr. Markman is heading the legal portion of it, both obviously working with the GA itself. Talked about the impasse that was achieved in March and April. We'll go through the factors on that. We'll talk, Mr. Johnson talked specifically at the April TAC meeting, and we relayed it in here at the PAC meeting about the schedule. And we talked about it extensively at our last 2 meetings, that we didn't think the schedule was maintainable. In fact, at last meeting, it was a topic that we made a recommendation to the GA itself that they make inquiries with DWR about any potential extension that may be achievable short term, and actually a longer term option that we gave them as well. The GA made the decision to continue on the path they are doing. They may be making inquiries in private with DWR. So what happened was they suspended the attorneys' meetings after the unproductive one and did not conduct the one just before that last meeting, and that led to the meeting that I referred to on on the 30th at the last GA in closed session where the decision was made to proceed forward with modeling scenarios on one path, on the technical path, and to proceed forward on the legal path with giving those two option scenarios. Hopefully, a merger was proposed of interest between Meadowbrook and Mojave that did not mature, as you saw in the opening sentence for Mr. Markman's statement, and any proposal that they wanted to bring forward, which was the agreement just before the meeting that was canceled. They did not bring one forward, and hence that was the end, essentially, and the start of the impasse. So I hope I'm not confusing folks, but that's how we got to where we were. The decision was made on the 16th to go down these, at the last GA meeting, to go down these two paths that are linked, because two of the scenarios are the ones referenced in Mr. Markman's document, and the other one is, the intent is to run all three scenarios before the next GA meeting. And they needed to do that because that takes roughly 30 days before the next GA meeting to move forward. And that's the timeline they were trying to work through in order to get to the end time requirement for January 31st, and actually the intent to have public hearings in June and July on the path forward, and with data behind them coming out of modeling scenarios and adjustments, and we'll talk about the last piece of that. Okay, these are the factors that actually were discussed and led to the impasse. The need to maximize conservation of basin storage. We have been mining this basin for well over 60 years. It goes back longer than that, but we've been overdraft from the available data since at least that time. Although there have been, that's why there's been lots of studies, because this is a very interesting hydrogeological valley that has a lot of things working in it. It's complex. And in some cases, we talked about it at our last meeting in the shallow well mitigation outreach plan, that we already have suffered water loss and well failure, et cetera, around the valley. So there were concerns about conservation of basin storage, especially after the running of the baseline model, which showed the basin running dry in 50 years with the planned pumping and no action. That's what the baseline showed. So the uncertainty of imported water. What imported water may be available, the GA is very concerned, and here's from folks on both sides of the issue that are very knowledgeable and connected to it, that it may not be a reality. We may not be able to do it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Or we may, and if we may, what are the amounts we may be able to get, and what is the expense? It may be prohibitively expensive, but it may not even be an option at all, and that we have to plan for that, as well as try to get imported water and test the feasibility of it. We're one of the first under a GA to approach having imported water as part of their GA, which we learned last month. Other folks have been wheeling water for a long time, but we're the first ones to potentially have it, if it's feasible, have it a consideration in our GSP. The second item is replacement of storage. The ramp down we've all talked about really is a continuation of mining above the sustainable yield for some period of time, which reduces the storage. What are the impacts to sustainable management criteria and objectives if we mine for how long? How much more damage is done against those criteria, which haven't been set yet? That's one of the items the TAC is working on. They had that discussion today on, out of the 6 critical items listed by Sigma, which ones are the ones that threaten the valley or not. For example, there's general agreement that seawater is probably not one of the ones that is of concern with us, although quality of water perhaps is. And certainly water levels is, and one of the presentations today involved water levels may be linked to the others and in fact serve as a criteria for more than one at different level settings. So replacement of storage if we have negative effects with whatever scenario is proposed. Owen Valley, those who have attended the GA have heard the Owens Inyo County rep, member of the Groundwater Authority, both Mr. Vallejo and I'm just having a senior moment. Matt Kingsley, thank you. And Matt Kingsley, who was at the last meeting themselves, expressed reservations and more than reservations about the willingness of Inyo County to import water. There were two caveats to that, though, over the couple meetings publicly stated. One was that, in fact, the opposition would be exceptional or higher if any of the water was being used for ag. The second discussion, specifically by Mr. Kingsley at the last meeting, was a little bit of an awareness effort for those in the public and on the board itself about the adjudicated nature of Inyo and the Owens Valley, and concern that, in fact, and it gets to a discussion that was held at the TAC today about if we were going to import water, the idea was that it would be exchanged for other water. It wouldn't be taking out of any adjudicated water. It wouldn't be water that was supposed to go to Inyo that came to us from DWP. It would be replaced by water that we had wheeled from elsewhere. There was skepticism on that, and the concern expressed with respect to ag. And most specifically, in drought years, LA cannot meet some of their adjudicated requirements. That's what Mr. Kingsley said today. So how do they tell their public that any water is coming to us if we are taking water out in that year? Now, that obviously leaves an opening for something that has been discussed on imported water other times, that there are different kinds of water contracts. Some of them involve excess years, wet years, those kinds of things where it's not an issue and you don't do it in those kind of years. But that gives you a framework of there's a potential there that could be worked with, but it's not anything that the GA is willing to consider as a known factor or quantity until we get assurances that it is. So they have to be conservative in the plan. That's why it's one of the impasse factors. We may not be able to get imported water or afford it. Potential irreversible loss of basin storage. If in fact we continue or we have a lengthy ramp down, we might not, and got to a critical point, we might not be able to afford the replacement or the subsequent actual lowering of the values, allocation values below, in order to replenish the basin. So there's a concern with the worst case showing a 50-year life of the aquifer at the worst case pumping, with the knowledge we have today, that what if we got in that situation? Reserve the storage needed for potential base demand increase. Emergency, the code word there is conflict, war, which is what drove the base to be built in this valley and drove the base to study the water in the basin extensively. And at the time, it came up in reference today, but at the time there was actually a turnout when the base was on Inyokern. It wasn't over here at Ridgecrest. When the base was using Inyokern and the airfield there was a turnout just to the west of it, up off the LA Aqueduct. And in fact, it's still there, but it hasn't been used since then, and likely in very bad disrepair. But it was mentioned at the meeting today, was there in the original contract or action that the Navy took or the War Department at the time took with LADWP that gave us some future right to that, and that was explored, and the answer at the time, or the answer in another venue, was no. However, the infrastructure piece of it is still there, not the pipes, though, that would take it to Ridgecrest. In any case, the idea was there, in a time of urgent need, the base would have its reserve right well beyond what it is today. Actual and potential impacts to shallow wells, water quality, pumping costs, and subsidence. Those are all parts of things that have been considered and are part of what might be sustainable management criteria. And many believe we're already seeing in the valley, and we have documented, and we've had spirited discussions with this group about the fact that we've already seen it. We are already having that in the valley. In fact, it's been stated publicly and recognized. Last item: if ag must fallow, why allow any removal of the reserve water supply at this time? Why extend it? Why have any more farming or any more pumping below the safe yield levels today? If they're going to have to fallow for buyout or whatever the reason is at some point, why extend that period? So that's how we got into an impasse, because if you look through that, obviously there are some groups and pumpers in the valley that would find some of those unacceptable without some commensurate mitigation. So that led to the first plan, or the first assessment, the basic health and safety needs, and this gets back to conversations that we've had in this room and the other room this committee has had. Estimated basic health and safety plus the Navy overall yields what we are currently estimating as the safe yield, 7,650 acre-feet per year. Current domestic-only use plus Navy uses in 2016 were as you see up there. So between the 7,650 and the 10,253, there's a deficit of roughly 2,600. And the Navy reserve rights extended off base well exceeds 7,650. So that's the minimum water user requirements. John?
Did they stipulate how that Navy reserve right was calculated? That didn't come from the Navy specifically, so I'm just wondering how they calculated that.
I don't remember them saying that. I don't know if you were in the room at the time. Anybody who attended the TAC remember? They were pushed for time. They were already 4 hours into their meeting at that point. So
and to build on the same question that John had, so to be honest with you, I don't even know where the number for the Searles Trona number also came from, because I don't think it's a number for Trona. It's a different number. So I don't know where they come up with the number.
I don't want to speak for Steve Johnson, but he did say that the whole point of this slide was just to show that even at a very reduced domestic low health and safety number, that it's still in excess of the native safe yield. He didn't really say any more than that as far as explaining where the
number came from. As far as the Trona number, I think you're looking at basic health and safety, so that's probably the Searles Domestic Water Company.
And I'm talking about that. That's not an accurate number.
Yeah.
That number is not an accurate number.
I'm just saying that's probably what it is, because it's obviously not for the plant.
I know. That's where they're going with it, but I'm just saying that that's not an accurate. I don't know where they got the number from.
Okay. Well, Raj, you're stipulating the number is probably higher than that.
I'm not going to commit to it. I just need to go check the numbers. That's what I'm saying.
I think the point that Josh brought up was relevant, though.
I would agree. I think Raj is right. I think it's closer to 500 acre-feet, if I'm not mistaken.
Either case, the number's higher than the sustainable yield as we know it today.
Right. So we have 2,000 residents there who need to, close to 2,000 who need to be
and you'll see
factored in. Yeah.
You'll see discussion of that in each scenario. Okay, so model run number.
Dave, excuse me, before we leave this slide, the first line is estimated basic health and safety, which I think is meant to imply that the following list of things are limited to health and safety. And when I take the domestic only, to me, domestic breaks down into two pieces, indoor and outdoor, if I can generalize. Most indoor would be health and safety. Outdoor would not generally be health and safety. I just want to point that out as something that doesn't quite add up in my mind because of that. But I'd personally distinguish domestic indoor and outdoor, and it may be academic or irrelevant at this point, but it did raise a question in my mind on this particular slide.
Yeah, I understand. I think at this point, with this level of fidelity, you're splitting hairs. But the point is well made.
The real point for me, sorry.
I would point out that under health and safety, in our present situation, that would include swamp coolers for many people, and they use water.
A lot of water.
Yeah.
So the real concern, at least from my end, is that I know we're trying to hurry up. Throwing numbers that may or may not be accurate is I don't know if that's the right path.
Understand.
Just have to be careful.
But the point, as Josh pointed out, the point of this slide was to say that even if we stopped all those things that aren't health and safety, we still are in overdraft, what we consider health and safety.
And I would like to agree with Judy. I would consider swamp cooling as domestic indoor use, not outdoor.
Okay, the model run number 3, which was to be the next one, and as I stated originally, the plan was that that would somewhat represent a baseline agreement of a plan to go forward, which would be tweaked at number 4. That all changed with the impasse. Model number 3 is being run as we speak. It began not two days ago, Tuesday, but the week before Tuesday. DRI actually runs the model. But to assemble the inputs and then have DRI begin to report out typically takes roughly 10 days, and I think it depends on what all is in the model with regards to management actions. But what is shown in these charts, model run number 3, 4, and 5 are the ones that are going to be run back to back to back and presented to the TAC. The intent is to have it ready for the next TAC meeting, which would be a month from today. I think I said GA earlier. I meant the TAC meeting. And they may have an attempt also to get it, but I don't see how they're going to make it in 2 days or in 2 weeks, all 3 models for the GA itself. But I think that's actually the stretch goal. Okay, the start of the management action would be January 22nd, and there were words that modified that. Essentially, the discussion was, let's link it to January 22nd, or if we have an approved GSP sooner. So it's upon approval of the GSP, and if the GSP is not approved by that time for some reason, it would begin then anyway, because you can begin management actions upon submitting the GA as it was presented. So the total pumping in 2022 would start off at that 28.6 mark, which was the reference earlier. For the first 10 years, the pumping would be at that level, so there's no ramp down. Then after 10 years, beginning in 2030, they said 10, but it's actually, as you see there, 9 years, 8 years. 2030 through 2039, reduce pumping by equal increments, 1/10 each year, to reach 7650. And then 2039 through 2070, pump at the sustainable yield. So that's farming, or mining the basin is a better term. Mining the basin for the first 10 years, and actually through 2040, doing your ramp down, and then leveling it at the 2040 point in line with Sigma requirement.
Just a comment. This, as you may recall, there was a white paper submitted by the major pumpers. How long ago was that, Don? I remember you introduced it like a year ago.
That's what this is.
But this was some numbers slightly changed. And
Yep.
Tony Brown tried to point out some numbers that had changed, but this captures the essence of
This captures the essence of the white paper. It had a slightly different number about when they would reach 7650, and they simplified that today. That discussion came up in the TAC. It was pointed out that the 7650 number through the 10 years was actually 1100 at that point, I think it was. I was not. I'm sorry?
11,000.
11, what did I say? Thank you for the correction. It's only a matter of order of magnitude. That's bad coming from an engineer. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that the differences were that the original discussion paper had it going to 11,000 in 2039, and then an additional 10-year ramp down to 7,650. And then I think that Stetson said they just basically truncated and abbreviated that
Exactly.
to make it simpler.
That's
to run.
what he said.
So-
Thank you for refreshing me. Appreciate it. I'm glad a few more than me were there with the specificity and the numbers.
It just emphasizes what younger people can remember, David.
I'm sorry?
It just emphasizes what younger people can remember.
They have more room in their brains, hopefully, if they didn't kill it. Okay, that's scenario number 3. That's the one that's running right now. It's been running for 9 days, roughly, if DRI began on last Thursday, which was our, as reported. Run number 4 and 5 get into the scenarios in Mr. Markman's paper. Model run number 4, which is the one proposed on page 1 of Mr. Markman's 2-page email, is represented here by model number 4. It's called the, humorously, because we all need to keep some humor in this process that could go a bad way if we didn't keep our sense of humor. It's called Water for Peace. Coordinated ag pumping with allocation transfers. The start would be the same as the previous one, as would the third. Pumping includes reduced pumping for unprotected allocation plus protected pumping. Protected pumping are those folks that you saw on the previous slide and referenced in Mr. Markman's. That is the 86% for the water district, for example, where Mr. Markman had additional detail that was not in Stetson's presentation today. So this is an engineering elevation of what they are working through, the details of what the inputs would be to the model right now, so that they can begin that as soon as the model number 3 is in fact completed. 2023 through 2027, unprotected allocations reduced by equal increments each year, and that's roughly the 1/6 referred to in Mr. Markman's document. So they go down by 1/6 each year for those that are still pumping. Recycled water is available to help reduce overdraft in 2025. 2028 through 2070, total annual pumping of 12,000 acre-foot per year. Then 2035 through 2070, total pumping augmented by imported water supply for the basin to be sustainable in other words, to get above the 7650, assuming imported water was available. So that's the model. Evaluate impacts to the water levels, and this is on the bottom of each one. You look, you make your changes, you evaluate where you are against your sustainable criteria that you've established. You look at the impacts of the water levels, shallow wells, and loss of the basin, and you actually do that periodically during the 40-year ramp down, at least at 5-year intervals, if not more often, I think is what's required. So this is the one that was put in to precipitate and help force further negotiations and alternatives on each side. The nuclear option that was stated in Mr. Markman's memo as what the board, the GA board, could in fact adopt if we're unable to arrive at an agreed allocation or management action structure is the next one. Start the same time, but immediate action essentially with the approval of the plan, or no later than January 2022, is negotiate or fallow all ag pumping to zero. Be that a market or remuneration or condemnation or whatever method, but all pumping would go to zero for ag immediately, January 2022, no later than. Searles to find a new supply or recycle water. Total annual pumping 2022 through 2034, 10,000 acre-foot per year. includes the Water District, the Navy, de minimis, domestic, Inyakern City, and Searles. That's pretty much what previously was referred to as your protected groups. 2025 recycled water available, and then 2035 through 2070 total pumping augmented by imported water supply for the basin to be sustainable, similar to the last one, and of course evaluated periodically during it as to impact to critical sustainability measures objectively. So those are the three that are being run sequentially. And as I said, the intent was that the results of those three, preliminary results of those three, would be available for the TAC 1 month from today at their next meeting. There would be let's see if I've got my notes. There's potentially one more option to be run, which could be the negotiated option, or it could be a modification of any one of these that looks the most likely. But they are looking at funding options for that one more. And who was it? Was it Mojave that volunteered to fund the two that are being done now?
Yeah, I think they must have found some other funding because that didn't end up coming to pass.
Okay, so although Mojave, for those that weren't here at the GA, Mojave volunteered to fund two, but it looks like they did funding for the other two. So we are now running three more models with the potential for one more that they are looking for funding for, at least according to what I heard today. Is that what you heard as well? Those that were at the meeting? Okay. On the 16th at the board meeting, they intend to have, or hopefully preliminary read on all three for their closed session for consideration, as well as the results of the next attorneys meeting, should there be one prior to it. And as we heard, the next attorneys meeting is May 23rd. So unless they move that up or somebody makes a unilateral offer and calls a meeting, they will not have had that meeting yet, but they will take it to the TAC supposedly ready 4 weeks from today, or at the TAC meeting. And in fact, at that time, we will have had, that's our meeting day as well, we will have had the next attorneys meeting after having the public, or after having the outcome of these available at the TAC, and the preliminary versions hopefully on the 16th if the timeline goes. So that's, as I understand it, that's what the plan was, that we're moving forward to try to get back on schedule towards meeting a GSP in the January 31st, 2022 timeline. 2021, I'm sorry. So questions on this data, recognizing that Stetson isn't here to defend it. I and those at that were attended the TAC meeting may be able to address questions on this.
So, David, this was issued today, right?
Today. Yeah, well, it was. I've sent the hard copy to everybody. I think it was yesterday or the day before.
Yeah.
Sure, but for us to disseminate this in our bigger pumper groups that we have within our organizations, it's not a one-day job.
Understand.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
So
and
comments will come, but they'll come.
Oh, yes, they will. And that's what we reserved that process with Mr. Markman the first time he met with us after the initial meeting, when we defined the series of attorney meetings going forward, that there was a recognition that some things were going to come to us late. We would get them. We would have time to comment on them and get those comments individually back to him, talked about them collectively at the next meeting. So this will be on our agenda next meeting to discuss the management actions that were proposed here and anything that comes out publicly about those action items out of the GA meeting on the 16th, at which they will have a closed session beforehand that will be discussing some portion of this. And I will be working with staff to have any of that disclosure available for us as it was this time before this meeting, so we can take up anything that's changed from this or outcomes that are available at that time we will have presented to us the results and available what's presented to the TAC. So whatever's available for the TAC, because it falls into item number 49 on the POAM, and if you read closely the letter Mr. Markman said, he said they would pursue the nuclear option with PAC review and input, as well as the public. That's in the document. So it will be presented to us, and I will push for that in the discussions on what will be on our next TAC agenda. You will see a PAC agenda. You will see a draft tentative placeholder for that on the agenda, much like there was this time. When that was placed on the agenda, we didn't know we were going to have these three available, and that agenda was approved with that as a placeholder.
I have a comment. My comment is, I find it unfortunate that the GA board has chosen to not use their TAC committee that are comprised of all technical people that they appointed to discuss and work on these model scenarios. They are not using what they chose to create. I find that very unfortunate.
I don't think they'd have met the timeline had they done it, but they didn't have a choice. They believed they didn't have a choice.
They had complete control over the timeline from day one. Everything that has happened was under their control.
So what, are you proposing the PAC make a comment on something?
No, I'm just making a comment to the PAC because everybody was not at the TAC meeting today. And they took a lot of time, you're talking about timelines, choosing the members of the PAC and the TAC. And yet, here, they have gone around them, basically.
I believe, knowing where we were on the timeline, they took the results of what the previous modeling scenarios had done by the TAC with that purpose that you just illuminated or explained, which was the intent of that group, took the results of those with the time they had, made a decision, and they're running the schedule in order to get the results in front of the TAC, and the TAC would be involved in the scenario number 6, is my understanding. We get to advise them. We don't get to choose their path forward.
I don't think we should choose their path forward. We're the PAC.
Concur. Other comments?
Yeah, just a brief comment. It's bothered me that it appeared that all of the scenario ideas were going to come out of the lawyers' meetings. And I was concerned that it looked like the GA was not stepping up and being part of that decision process. And so I think there is a little bit of a positive side to this coin. I think finally the GA has stepped up, or their lawyers at least, and started contributing towards the ideas in play here for how to proceed. So the other side of the coin, I think there's a major positive step forward here that the GA is starting to play in this dialogue. And I think Judy would observe it's too bad it happened in secret, but I think there is a positive point here.
I would agree, and I would further note that the basics for each one of the scenarios that are in Mr. Markman's memo, and therefore scenarios number 4 and 5, the basics of that are all ideas or points that were discussed at length in this committee, and should be something that we should recognize, that there was value in those discussions and inputs we had in exchanges with Mr. Markman, and then the exchanges in the GA that resulted around, for example, health and safety and reasonable use, and some of those specific comments that were made at the last GA. So I think from a policy side of the house, we had a we had a good input as to where we sit right now, and reading between the lines of what Mr. Markman wrote and what is in the top-level summary of these scenarios, they were embraced, and in fact are part of the negotiation.
So just for my knowledge, since I joined the PAC only in October last year, are you saying or suggesting that some of these modeling scenarios occurred, the input from the PAC went prior to October last year?
No, I don't know if it was October, but our discussion under item number 49, and actually going back to the first meetings with Mr. Markman, where we agreed that we could talk about allocation opportunities, more specifically management action options, sustainable management criteria. We fought to be able to talk about some of those for almost a year. And then we're allowed to begin to talk about those with Mr. Markman, and agreed to that iterative process to review them. And in that process, many of the things that we talked about are included now in some of these options. But there was no scenario specifically that we proposed to the level that they talk about.
Yeah, because I quite don't understand some of the scenarios. So
Okay.
either maybe you were a bit more specific, or I couldn't pick up, but I just don't understand some of these.
Those are very top-level summaries of action, management actions that have a lot of detail below each.
Okay.
And that's what what they put together essentially 2 days ago to send to present to the PAC today, and to the TAC today. And I requested that under our item number 6, specifically POA&M 49, that we review these tonight. And that was embraced.
So let me summarize what I heard and make sure that because I'm going to take this back to where I need to take it to. So you're saying that if I go over the PAC notes for the last 5 months, I'll find input in there that has been built into these model runs?
Well, you recognize the discussion about, I think, let me find a specific reference to reasonable and health and safety. Those items you will find in discussion.
That I remember.
Yeah, that's the
I'm just
major
talking
one.
There are a lot of other things too, so that's
Yes.
what I'm asking.
Yeah.
So there are some of them I remember. I don't remember all of them, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I don't remember all of them either.
Okay,
But they are
all right.
they are major components that we talked
All
about.
right, and now
in
I
here
understand what you're saying.
That if you look at the baseline in scenario 1 and 2, our discussions about the review of those, which I think began 2 months ago, maybe 3, is where we started proposing alternatives. We had specific questions. Can we propose alternatives? What are the issues? Mr. Panzer brought up research in the Constitution, state Constitution, and SIGMA and some others, and had a lively dialogue with Mr. Markman and regarding case law. We had one in this room that Lorelei brought the idea about SIGMA perhaps gave the GA new authorities, and in fact, de minimis users were a special carved-out group. All of those discussions originated during that time frame with this group.
I'd like to comment and tie something Judy has observed and Raj has asked. It was in the PAC meeting of July 2017 that 5 critical policy questions were introduced. And Lorelei Oviatt volunteered to, hey, let's chart these. A couple of members put some data in there, and Lorelei summarized it, and we teed it up to go for the August 17 meeting. And it was during that meeting that we received a telephone call.
That explains a lot, because
Yeah.
I joined
Yeah.
the PAC, I think, in October or something. So I'm looking at some of these items, and I'm not able to understand. Since October, I remember particularly Nick's input very clearly. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, and some of the de minimis users, I'm not sure that we made any strong recommendations that have gone into these model scenarios.
Say that again?
I don't remember having made any recommendations that were considered for these scenarios outside of what Nick very appropriately brought up in terms of health and safety.
There are some others. They're specific Federal Reserve rights expressed in a certain way. There's a couple others there. What?
Yeah, again, those I'm not arguing the ones that are almost acceptable, accepted
Yeah.
norm. I'm talking about some of the other till in fact a couple of months ago, were we not trying to collect de minimis users or pumpers' data? We were
We
trying to
still
get them
are,
to
and that's-
register, and that's what I meant.
Yeah,
That's
and
what I
they're
meant, so-
in here.
All right.
Yeah, those are, some of those are in here now. Some of the very items we talked about, as well as the discussion we had about condemnation, mitigation, or monetization, water markets. Some of those are buried in this. Any other questions or discussion from the committee on this, Pat?
I'm not going to belabor this. I'm just going to say that model number 5, model run, ought to be thrown in the trash. And the reason is it's going to be horrendously expensive. It's going to create chaos, discontent, range war, you name it. It's not going to work. Do something else.
Don't necessarily disagree with you.
And if you want to, if the word litigation pops out, well, there it is.
Well, and that's
And
what Mr. Markman stated.
You're
This is
gonna
the
back-
one that will probably precipitate.
Oh, yeah. You're going to back people
litigation.
right up against the wall. And they will fight back, even the little guys, out of an emotional effort to save whatever they have. And it's foolish. I mean, I understand why it's run. It probably had to be run just to say it had to get run, and there it is. But now that we've seen it, I think we ought to spend our time working on something else.
As you said, there's a desire to see what is the impact of that.
Oh, yeah, I
On the basin,
understand. I
on the
understand, but I would warn anybody in this room, do not take this home and put it under your pillow and wish for it.
One of the things that we're reserving, I mean, there's a couple things at work here. One, you technically, as an engineer, you want to know if we went into balance today, or if we did it as soon as we could possibly do, worst case, it's the opposite of the do nothing case. It's how much do we save? Is where in the middle is the sweet spot technically, where you have the least impact for the least impact to livelihood, citizen.
David,
Economics,
Dave,
et cetera.
sometimes when you do an engineering model, you look at the extreme cases, and that's what these are.
Yes.
Now, one thing that's missing is we don't have a middle ground case. What do we really need to do? How much imported water do we need? And how much conservation are we going to have to do? And we don't have a model that looks at some kind of middle ground responsible approach.
Model number.
They're working
Model
on it.
number 4 is closer to it. Models number 2 and 3 also have some of the impacts of imported or not, and what you're going to see out of each one of these is, as we have already seen out of 2 and 3, Model number 1 and 2, which are actually 2 and 3, showed impacts to shallow wells. So it's getting at one of the criteria, sustainable management criteria. Each one of these different models is going to show rates of drawdown and what the varying impacts to the 6 potential critical issues are for the basin, critical sustainable management criteria. Lorelei.
Tim, I think that's a good point. I think Model 4 is the moderate one because the incremental ramp down starts immediately. It starts in 2023 to start those incremental ramp downs to 12,000, whereas Model Run 3 doesn't start ramp downs until 2030. So to me, I think that's an excellent point. I thought it was a good range of models from the most severe unreasonable model, which is the one I consider to be let's just keep pumping, to the nuclear option, which is let's just stop everything.
Yeah.
So I think your point's well taken, though, that people need to understand there is a moderate kind of range in there, right? And that's how these engineers are thinking about it. And so that I don't think these models are designed that there couldn't be some hybrid. after we look at the impacts. A piece from this, a piece from that, and then you start, maybe the ramp down isn't 12,000, maybe it's 14,000, maybe it's 18,000, but that's part of the iterative process of public debate, right, of bringing us. I think one of the things, your question about, what the PAC has been able to do, I just got to tell you, at the very beginning, the de minimis users were an afterthought. I think these models absolutely represent the PAC's input that says, you're not going to put us on the list after you figure this all out. It was kind of like, well, de minimis users. Yeah. We know we have to set aside that 2 acre-feet. I think this really represents a collaborative inclusion, and it also represents the mutuals. The mutuals came in kind of late that conversation, and then they changed the law, and the wholesale users. So that was I'll call it the discussion that had to happen, that the PAC had to keep raising these issues. What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? So I do think it represents the worst case to the worst case. How about saying it that way? And then some ones in between. So
well, I think your point's about, I was trying to say the same thing, Tim.
Yes.
You're exactly right, that we bookended this with those two, with the baseline, and in fact, we used future predicted pumping to do that baseline worst case. This is the other worst case side of it, and the runs in the middle, you characterize them from an engineering perspective properly, in that we're going to get data from each one of these that compares on how did each one of these compare against what the TAC develops as the measurable objectives within this and the sustainable management criteria, one of which is water levels, impact on shallow wells, which we're talking later about the mitigation plan for that exact thing. So you can compare what is, given the pain for each one of these, what is the value, and it's informing every one of the folks at the negotiating table in the attorneys' meetings of where their tipping point may be. And to that end, getting to a January 31st of 2021 without having a lengthy technical path forward individually or a negotiated agreed to path to start with, that's why they went down this path. And I think that's why they're also searching for funding for a 6th, which would represent either, if we get a negotiated one, to see if that in fact meets everybody's best interests, or in fact what is the closest to the one that we're actually going to have to go execute. That's the way I interpret it as an engineer. As a negotiator, I interpret this as we have a public-private negotiation going on right now. The attorneys' meetings are not open to the public because they are representing individual interests and trading and feeling each other out, and they're being informed by the things the TAC is doing and the PAC is doing. Some of the things in the PAC were very much represented in the last 2 attorneys' meetings that led to both the impasse and then the procedure to get moving forward. So we are seeing things and negotiating stances that we see every day at national level or in our businesses, where you start out here with the intent you'd like to maximize your return, but you're trying to find what is the place you can get to. And we're informing it with the models and the tax recommendations and assessments from that perspective, and we're informing it from the public reaction, and you talk specifically to that, the public input, the alternatives that we've proposed from a public outreach and policy perspective. That's the way what I see going on, and we're performing a valuable role with the public to give the GA information, and the GA members watch this. That's one of the reasons it's on video now, those that can't attend in person, because they want to hear the public feedback. They want to hear the exchange from each one of us who represents and was selected to represent, and volunteered, of course, to represent our groups and our different viewpoints. Because although we live in one community, we each have slightly different interests when it comes to what we're doing with the water that we have. And sometimes, as we all sucked air through our teeth when, after Mr. Markman's first meeting with us and said the A word, the allocation word, that Lyle doesn't like to use, and we were afraid of at the time. We've now been heavily involved in the middle of this and bringing some of this to light. And it's been fun. We weren't sure we could do that. And we all signed up and committed to it. None of us has knifed the other in the night that I know of yet. We still have more to go.
I want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I read these model scenarios, and I know they're going to be run on water level. They need to be run on water quality as well. Water quality in this valley is very important, and it is declining as wells must be pumped deeper and deeper. The other thing I want to say is at last month's meeting, West handed out the domestic well owners' version of a sustainability plan, which doesn't use allocations at all. It uses the water market, the price of water. And no one has either read it or they threw it in the trash or said anything about it. But it certainly is a different way of looking at things.
It was forwarded to them. I know for sure a couple of them read it. I'm sorry?
They handed it out.
We handed it out.
They handed it out at the
Right.
last meeting.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in fact, what a couple of these options do, it's a different way, but they create a water market.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they don't do it by forcing allocations. There's a difference, as you pointed out.
Right.
But it does force a market, which, as we heard, has worked with success in other basins. So additional comments on the scenarios before we go to the public?
If you look at the utilities market, gas, natural gas, water, electricity, you pay for it with a market on whatever it is that the product is. And there's no reason that water in this valley couldn't be paid for the same way. Food for thought.
I had another quick comment I want to make. I want to amplify Lorelei's comments just a bit as far as, technically bookending the alternatives. And really, the most serious bookend was probably the first scenario that was run. And that was basically every pumper was given what they wanted. They were asked how much water they would like, and that would be the bookend for the most serious pumping. If this were to be, if this scenario number 5 were truly to be the bookend for the least pumping, it wouldn't bring us down to 10,000 acre feet. It would bring us down to 75, 60. But I'm not necessarily making proposals here, just observations. And I would like to note, too, that the 2 acre feet for de minimis, they're showing less than 1 acre foot in the starting numbers per de minimis. So, say again?
Why are they doing that?
I don't know.
Well, it may be more reflective of what's actually being pumped.
I know, but I don't think we have meters on all of the houses, so they have the right to pump more. I'm a little surprised to hear that they're not just taking the built environment, multiplying that by 2 acre feet.
This is a one-page summary of the scenario. I'm not sure they.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the TAC.
Yeah, the TAC didn't have time to get in depth into it either.
These
were the slides presented at the TAC. That's all they had.
Got it.
And I've said more than I learned there.
Was that numbers that were used from the water district for the average household or something? I mean, I don't know. I'm just wondering where it might have come from there.
What are you at? The 6412 that was on there? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, they were saying, it was less than an acre foot, so.
Which scenario were you referring to? What?
800 acre feet for the minimum.
Yeah.
Oh, on that very first slide?
Yes.
Yeah,
I don't know where
And
that came
domestic
from.
mutuals?
Yeah, I think you add domestic mutuals to
Right
the
below
de
it.
minimis, and you come up with 1,100, and 1,100, I remember, was when Mr. Markman had the private meetings in October with the individual pumper groups. I remember 1,100 came up for the,
Oh, that makes sense.
all the de minimis.
It
And
had to
they
have come
put
from
the
somewhere. I
mutuals-
just wondered where.
We've had a couple notes, and and it'll be in the minutes and in my report, that we questioned some of the
Data point.
data points on this slide, and look to get more definition on this and each scenario.
Yeah, there's a significant gap from what I know, starting with the 2014 Todd's engineering report, all the way to this 800 acre foot per year. There's a significant gap in the way they're actually reporting de minimis because they don't know. So they've used some environmental, some, above ground, some techniques, and they estimated initially 25, 40 or something. Then they used some more techniques and estimated 23, 40. Everybody else is being metered. I think de minimis, my understanding is they're just estimating right now.
That's correct.
So I'd just like to say for the record that because we have GIS, because the county did the Indian Wells Valley land use plan, we actually, de minimis means you have a house on the lot with water well, and you're using it for domestic use. You can add those numbers up. There's 400 houses, there's 300 houses. I know that's not very scientific. I'm just concerned that if they're going to run modeling scenarios, I have the right to use 2 acre feet if I'm a de minimis user. I appreciate that everybody, I'm not a de minimis user, by the way, I live in Rosamond, but anyway, if I was a de minimis user, the idea that suddenly other users like ag aren't being given some sort of allocation, but my de minimis is suddenly being modeled at 1 acre feet simply because that's what I'm supposed to use, I feel like that's an overreach by the modelers. You should run the de minimis based, and just in my opinion, on the number of built houses on a well. That's a domestic user. So that we can have a more accurate evaluation. Then if they want to cut back, look, we found water. So that's just what I'd like to put in the record as a thought for the TAC.
We'll capture that, as well as the
Appreciate
fact that we recommend that the TAC review all, they know what they're doing on this, and they're even better informed and more technically aware than we are, and go through these in the scenarios for accuracy.
I believe they got this information from the spreadsheet that the cooperative group maintained.
Yeah,
And it just dawned on me when I see the 800 for de minimis and the 300 for domestic mutuals. On that spreadsheet, I believe it's 1,100 for private wells, so that's the 800 and the 300.
And that's
The TAC
consistent
just
with
needs,
baseline.
the TAC just needs to verify that, because there's some confusion about it. And Lorelei's point additionally.
My point is, so what? So what, I reported to the cooperative group and they put it on a spreadsheet. I have the right to pump it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good comment.
Well, the law says that you cannot require de minimis to put a meter or report usage, but you can, the GA can tell them they can pump half an acre foot a year, and if we think you're pumping more than that, we're going to charge you for what we think you're pumping. If you want to prove you're pumping the amount that we've allocated to you, then you feel free to put a meter in and demonstrate that you're pumping that. So that's the argument that the de minimis well owners have provided to the GA, is that you can get around this deal. You can allocate water to de minimis, and if you feel that they're pumping more than their allocation, then let them prove it by putting a meter in. And that's the logic that we use, and we've presented that. So,
Nick, you wanted to comment?
Yes, just to rephrase what Wes just said in James Worth's words, the GA is free to regulate the de minimis pumpers as part of the plan. And I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. Conservatism would say maybe get it in there at 2 on the runs, but we should recognize, all of us, that it may be appropriate and entirely reasonable and wise to at some point regulate the de minimis pumpers bring down their two to a lower amount, but it has to be a part of the plan and totally due processed.
Any other member comment?
Yeah, I just want to say that these numbers for the minimum water uses probably came from the cooperative groundwater group's data sheet, and these were available last year and years before, but they're pretty close to everything on the sheet from 2017.
Any other member comment?
I just note again that the 800 acre feet that's allocated is less than an acre foot. It's not the 2 acre foot, but it could be less if it were required by the Groundwater Authority. So
Okay.
I'm with you. It needs to be controlled.
Public comment.
Earl Wilson. Just a little bit of clarification here. This is for health and safety, okay? That's minimal use, and whether they actually do that or not, we don't know. But we need to do the modeling run to see what it does as far as the groundwater for storage and for drawdown. So I hope that helps clarify things.
Thank you, Earl.
Don Decker. The numbers there for example, the mutuals and the de minimis pumpers is not coming from the cooperative group older numbers. It actually is based upon, we have somebody trying to get into the bank vault.
That's not a big rat. Go ahead, Don.
A substantial effort on Gene Moran's part went into actually looking at the property records, as you suggested, Lorelei, and the two numbers there are based upon actual connections. The 800 is a little less than an acre foot per connection, and as Earl said, perhaps the idea here was to come up with some minimum water uses. But there's always an argument about what a health and safety number is. We, in our domestic well owner plan, suggested using a basic allocation concept rather than health and safety to avoid that struggle. Because in fact, when you actually divide up the available water, as you see right here, it's 10,000. I can't quite see it from my angle here. 10,000 some odd acre feet. We haven't hit our 7650, and if you actually dial it down to the 7650 with those various claimants, you're going to end up with many of those parties saying this is not health and safety. This is something else. It's small, in other words. So, but I think the whole point of the list and the numbers was to get some kind of a start with a minimum number, and exactly how you get the numbers and what the full significance is this is just a input to a scenario. So this is not somebody's allocation in the plan at this point. We're just trying to understand what the implications are. But there is a basis for many of those numbers actually in reality.
Thanks, Don. Other public comment?
Hi, good evening. Derek Hoffman, attorney from Meadowbrook. I just want to make a few observations. Being that I'm one of the attorneys in the attorney meetings, I'm just going to base my comments on occurrences here at the public meetings, at the PAC, the TAC, the board, and just share a few observations since this is really just a discussion item today. The first is, on your comments a moment ago, Raj, part of the reason why you're having difficulty connecting the dots between what's been discussed and recommended or not at these meetings to where we get to that dot of those model scenarios is because those dots can't necessarily be connected. Those model scenarios were conceived in a closed session of the board. Okay? So that's the first observation that I would make. The second observation that I'd make, to your comment, David, about those modeling scenarios, which are reflective of the allocation concepts as well, by the way. They're tied together. These are not being proposed as totally separate processes. Let's be clear on that. But the discussion items that have been discussed in the past about health and safety water, about reasonable and beneficial use, all these ideas that have been floated may have been discussed, but they were never recommended by the PAC, at least not that I can recall. So when you mention that it's being embraced, I don't think that's correct. I think they're being potentially embraced by the board in closed session. But my comment is that, there's a difference between a recommendation being made by the PAC with support that gets received by the board and then decided upon. That's different than I think what we're seeing here. And I'll also remind you what I remember Jim Markman saying about some of those concepts when it was pushed and pushed, and he was asked, what's the legal premise for these? And as I recall, and I'm not speaking for him, I'm just summarizing what I heard him say, which was those are unprecedented legal theories. They've never been tested before. And another synonym for unprecedented is risky. So these are very controversial allocation, aka modeling scenarios, and they've been presented to all of us out of a closed session of the board. And I just also want to close with a quick observation. Again, I'm just offering my thoughts tonight, which are that even under allocation scenarios or modeling scenarios 4 and 5, they still don't solve the problem. You're still short several thousand acre-feet of water. So the question you ought to be asking, I think, in that is, what problem is it that's really trying to be solved through those modeling scenarios? And I'll just leave it at that tonight. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek.
Anita M. Sand, Meadowbrook Dairy. Since we've started this process back in probably 2013, we've had a very difficult time feeling like we, the public, have been included. I have always, since I started in the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group, I've sat at different tables and heard different people speak, and I've always heard, we don't have a water problem, we have a water quality problem. And so I think we all got to keep in mind that China Lake, has a Superfund site, and their EPA number is CA2170023152. So go to the EPA website and look the number up and look at how many sites on China Lake Naval's weapons facility need to be cleaned up. And then look at where the Navy pumps their water from. Where are their wells that they are using? Where are their production wells? And then keep in mind, drive up to the stream gauge up at, someone help me here.
Sand Canyon?
Sand Canyon. Eddie and I were just there today because we're doing the monitoring of it. Drive up there and look at the water that is coming down. And then if you feel like hiking a little bit, hike down or drive your car a little ways and go by the big pit and keep on going down and realize that water is all going into the groundwater. And then listen to the TAC and look at what their data is coming on some of these wells. And look and see, are they really going down? There are sites that are going down, but look and really study the map. So take these other things into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to the next agenda item, the Shallow Well Mitigation Plan Ad Hoc Subcommittee Report. We formed the subcommittee. We were asked by the GA to look at the draft mitigation plan that they had sent to us for review and make recommendations and actually expand on some sections was the tasking from last time. And we have a report. Our ad hoc subcommittee on that report met and has provided us a one-page summary of their meeting. Is there a chair that wants to speak for the committee?
Go for it, George.
Sure. So I'm just going to read real quick. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to read real quick from the written statement. And then we had discussed that there was some additional just individual member comments that we wanted to make. So, this is from the written document. So there was much discussion of this draft document and perhaps some misunderstanding on what we were tasked to do. The meeting progressed smoothly once it was understood that the purpose of the mitigation plan is not to decide which wells are mitigated, but rather how to assess failed wells already chosen for mitigation. Some thought we were to add much detail to the items line by line, and others thought that we were to really agree with more potential minor changes. In the end, we agreed that the plan was acceptable with a couple of minor changes. And then we also talked about possibly as maybe a future item for the PAC, or just as a general discussion item tied to this, about that we should request the GA look at mitigation fees as a way to help offset some of the effects of the overdraft in the basin. So the group discussed the fact that other areas had water issues, required builders to purchase water rights to help mitigate overdraft. In some areas, property can't be developed until water rights for the property are purchased. In some areas, wells must be registered before the sale of property is finalized, including when the property changes ownership. So the group strongly feels that the GA board and the PAC need to discuss the above-mentioned issues and answer the questions below. How can the county, the city, and the water district permit growth without mitigation of existing overdraft problems? So that was the kind of written report from what we discussed. The part that I wanted to include that we decided not to include as a written report or as a change to the draft was that I felt there needs to be a lot more discussion on the funding side of mitigation and tied to areas of benefit and areas of harm, basically, and that there needs to be some look at whether you call them management zones or whatever you want to call it, that there's questions about if a well, 1 mile east of Ridgecrest goes dry, who in the basin is responsible for helping mitigate that, or does the entire basin pay into some general pot that's used to help, So that was just one of my points, was that really not to get into the technical weeds, but just from a philosophical standpoint, should it be the entire basin helps everybody in the basin out, or you create little areas and you say, if we think this area was harmed by these pumpers, they pay into a pot with some other sources of funds, hopefully grants and other things, and that creates the fund that helps the users in that area who have a well issue. So that was one of that kind of went way down a couple rabbit holes, and so we decided to not dig too deep on some things and stay at a consensus-driven level, so we didn't include that in the written part or anything. So those are my comments.
We felt that this was adequate and good the way it is currently written and should go forward. The issue Josh brought up would be something that I think would be in the plan itself under the title of mitigation and how to pay for it, and not in the shallow well plan here. And
yeah,
I thought it was interesting that after we were done talking about that, I don't know, I think it was Josh that brought it up and then Pat chimed in. The issue of, okay, the state has declared us to be in critical overdraft high priority, and yet we continue to talk about in the newspaper and approve building projects. For instance, I'll bring up the large apartment complex that is supposed to be built on Downs and Bowman, and yet there's nothing that we knew of to, I'm not quite sure what the right word I want is, where the developer, and of course when the developer builds something and has costs, it's always passed on to the buyer, to buy into this overdraft plan, there ought to be some sort of fee that is paid by the new people that are theoretically going to come, or the new business. And what was discussed actually was, here you have agriculture paying a pumping fee to help fund the GSP, and yet there is apparently nothing in the works for new growth to pay something towards this same fee.
It's maybe you could call it part of the EIR for, say, a 400-room hotel, that they have to step up every bit as much as anybody else and come up with proof, for example, that they have the water to support a 400-room hotel. And perhaps they, whether they're a developer or whoever they are, they need to go forth and find somebody willing to sell them a certain amount of water rights to cover that. And it's mitigation that's done all over. It's not just here. It's not a new idea. Mm-hmm. It's everywhere. And I use Tahoe for an example because it's a quick one. And basically, if you want to put more roof over your property in Tahoe area, so you want to expand your house, you have to go find a piece of property, purchase that, leave it vacant, so that mitigates the piece of property you're going to roof over. And, that needs to be done here in Ridgecrest. And the fact that it's not just simply says you guys are way behind what you should be doing. It should be part of every basic EIR. In fact, if I remember right, Jim Gregory had to do it.
Anyway, we thought, since that's really not the topic, we thought it would be a topic for a future agenda.
I think it is the topic. And I would say we had the charter, and I exchanged the discussion with the GA representatives on what is the tasker here, and I must not have clarified it very well last time. And given the amount of discretion we've been given and viewed as useful in so doing now, we had 4 tasks, subtasks under this that were assigned to us that we all thought were going to be pretty meaty. One was simply to review the memo. And generally what the group has reported back is that it was a very good start. There are a few things that need adjustment. And then we're almost saying we were afraid to discuss items B through D, which was how do we evaluate well owner responsibilities for impacted shallow wells post-GSP adoption. Item D is how to evaluate previously ones pre-GSP. And then item C, I think, gets at exactly something that would be in our purview to recommend to them as a funding option for the mitigation. That is a funding option, and it allows you to address growth or any other new building, whether it's growth, whether they're actual growing or it's replacing a building or whatever. They were looking from us, our recommendation from a policy perspective, how do we evaluate the well owners, the impact to them? What are the criteria we might recommend? There would be a technical piece of that, of course, but it has policy applications post-adoption of the GSP. Same thing for anybody who's already been impacted and can demonstrate that that was because of pumping in the valley. And then getting it exactly at this issue, I think, which would scratch the itch on a lot of the discussion it sounds like you had, is give us a list of some options and some thoughts and places and those, for example, where it's been done or been done before, or that we think, your question, Josh, about who pays for this. Some of the options are, is there a way, what might be the criteria for it to localize a mitigation? if you have a big pumper in one area and somebody near the proximity, or whatever criteria might come up with? Or is it general? Is there a subgroup, new building permits, fees, exchange, purchase additional land? All those things could be put in a set of recommendations of options that would have to be explored further, but give them some ideas. Because what we talked about was the tiered idea that depending on what the impact was, the mitigation could be costly, and how many and what level of mitigation are we proposing. And so that could tier funds needed and level of funding and where fees might be appropriate and might not. That, I think they're looking for advice from our policy advisors on what are some things we could consider for this plan and put more meat on the bones of what we agreed was a good plan to start with.
But it was unclear to me whether that was necessary at this point, since we don't even have a plan yet.
We know we've got folks impacted. In fact, we've talked about that, and how long are we going to let that continue? The TAC is going to make recommendations with regards to what the criteria should be.
But doesn't,
why should we not? I mean, why should we wait to
because
give them advice?
We don't have an adopted plan to back us up.
We don't. We're developing a plan in case a well needs mitigation.
How are they going? How is the GA board going to do that when they don't have a plan yet to suddenly say, okay, we're going to vote on ordinance 2 or 1 or whatever, that they don't even have that structure yet, to say this is our well mitigation plan when they haven't even got their GSP yet.
We wouldn't be writing their ordinances or anything. We're giving them a list of options to consider depending on what the outcome of the plan is, rather than waiting for the plan and having people impacted. As we've heard on many of these options, there'll be more people impacted depending on how long the ramp down time is. And
I know that perfectly well.
Yeah, so should we not start now? That's the question. I mean, give them advice. They're going to have to go do a lot of research to get to an ordinance part. And yes, it would require a GSP at that time. But as we talked about, I applauded them, we applauded them, the group did, for having thought through something at this point so that we would be ready to go and be a part of the plan.
Well, I guess some of us misunderstood, because we thought the objective was to go forward with this right here. And I don't know if you want to vote on it. I think it's fine the way it is. I mean, the few things we had were a couple of words. To give it back to Stetson with our blessing. I don't know what the rest of the committee thinks, if they've read it.
It's an opportunity for us to influence what the mitigation might be. We weighed in heavily on the approach.
But that's separate from this. This is a plan. We can put together mitigation issues for all kinds of things if you would like us to.
And I think they've asked for a shallow well mitigation plan. And specifically funding options and evaluation options.
Can I ask you which document you're referring to? The one from the last meeting?
Yes.
This one, this outline?
Yeah, it says draft on the top.
It's an outline.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not really a plan, it's just...
No, they're asking us to flesh out parts of it, recommend parts of it for them.
They just have like an outline and outlined, I guess, what they want us to have in each section. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
They were getting...
They want all those things covered?
Well, they specifically wanted those 3 items covered. Plus, overall, they wanted a review of the document, and we said we like that. And then they asked for, can you fill out more in these 3 areas? How do we evaluate well owner responsibilities for impacted shallow wells? So we just talked about a postcard sending out to these folks to try and get them to register and give us the additional data so we can identify them and impact the sustainable management criteria and potentially mitigate. And so now, how do we evaluate that mitigation is the next question. They're committing to, hey, we're going to go try to find grants. We're going to try to provide some mitigation. They're implying that clearly. How do we, now having said that, how does a GSA evaluate owner responsibilities versus what might be eligible for mitigation or not post-GSP? How about folks that have pre-GSP is the folks beforehand? And then the one that actually touches exactly on what we just talked about is, what are some of the funding options to make that mitigation? This is right, in my mind, this is right up the line of what we begged for a long time when we said we weren't getting any meaty tasks to discuss. And stuff that if you are going to have, imagine we pass a GSP, we say we're going to register wells, we're going to subject them to do this, and we have the mitigation plan we told you was coming, but we don't know how we're going to do it, we don't know how we're going to evaluate the wells. They're trying to have that ready to go at the same time.
David,
that's what they're trying to do.
The way I understood this is that I gave a not too pretty example, but it's the coroner declares the body dead, and he sends it in for an autopsy. Okay, this is the autopsy. This is not the decision that the wells needs to go have an autopsy. That's yet to be written. This is the chapter of the report that says, okay, a well's been declared defunct. What, if any, is the responsibility of the groundwater authority to mitigate this well? If the well had already collapsed, it did not fail because the groundwater dropped too low, or it did not fail because the groundwater became too brackish, then maybe the groundwater authority owes no money to help repair this well.
And what kind of data do they have to present when they walk into the GA office and say, I'm a shallow well, mitigated, here, where's my money? Well, what proof do they have to have?
And I think that's when the groundwater authority would go out and evaluate that well, to do the autopsy. Okay, and this is telling the guy doing the autopsy what to do. That's strictly what this is not.
I
the
see
part.
What you're saying.
This is not.
What are some of the criteria you might use?
And that's exactly what this outlines. So once and I was confused on that initially. Okay, I went and wrote a whole thing about how to determine how to be the coroner, but then I made up these examples myself. So. But then when I was finally convinced that, no, this is the autopsy, then that's what this is meant to be. They haven't written the part of the draft. They haven't drafted the part of the GSP that's going to be the coroner.
They don't even have a well registration form yet, I don't think.
So anyway, that's the context I put this in. So we were evaluating strictly is this good guidance on how to evaluate a well that has failed and determine how much. Because we don't want to just have carte blanche for the GA to be required to pay every nickel of a well that maybe was going to fail anyway.
For sure.
Right.
So do we want to reconvene the subcommittee with a better understanding of what we'd like to recommend back, or do we want to go back with saying we like the document with a couple mods, and we also recommend that you take on the issue of growth as a part of it? But the best way to address growth in my mind right now is to discuss that as one of the funding options and get it on the table.
I think it's a broader topic in that.
It is, but
in my mind, so maybe it should be introduced for what it is on its own. Basically, in my mind, there's a real, we're doing everything we can to keep the Navy in this valley. We want to be sure that the Navy stays. It's most of the jobs. It's the future. And so say we get a GSP in place that succeeds at that, and then any growth that's done without being part of that GSP or bringing its own water is a direct threat to the Navy. And that message needs to go out that, for example, the city, I think they need to do their planning. They maybe should ask their planning commission to address this problem. Are you going to just grow willy-nilly, or are you going to have growth that's directed towards keeping the Navy here? It might be a more focused growth. Maybe the growth is more turned inward in renewal of existing older structures. So I think, if I understand it right, that's the subject that we came up with, is growth needs to be very carefully planned to benefit the Navy, and it needs to reflect the GSP, and maybe growth needs to bring its own water into the valley.
Can we do both? Can we give a little more flesh on the bones that they gave us of the dead body that the newspaper is going to write? The PAC was talking about dead bodies, Jessica, tonight. Can we put meat on the bones of criteria, responsibilities for impacted wells? Breathing life. There, we'll make it positive. Breathing life back into the dead body, which now starts to sound like Walking Dead.
I think we should go forward with this as it is and do the other as a separate document.
Well, where I was headed to finish was flesh out these 3 items, bring one of the options you talked about, which was new growth, and as a funding option for this, and then we'll ask to get new growth overall as a topic, because it's broader than just the mitigation topic, but it is a potential source for funding just for mitigation too. So we killed 2 birds with 1 stone.
But I don't think that should be a part of this.
It doesn't have to. What I was saying is do those 3 items, B, C, and D, of which a potential funding option for mitigation of wells might be assessing new growth in some fashion, which would have options to it. And then we can raise issues about concern overall with how we handle growth in the valley in concert with the GSP. And be allowed to discuss that specifically with recommendations we might come back with. Does that make sense? Is the small subcommittee willing to take that on? Or leave it where we're at?
I would say that our last meeting, we didn't have clear direction, and it was unproductive, to be polite and frank at the same time. So I would be willing to meet again, but I would like to have, I guess, permission from this PAC board to discuss details, because I felt like we were, for whatever reason, unable to discuss any type of detail over the last 3-hour ad hoc meeting we had. So I would like to discuss well construction. What type of, is it plastic? Is it steel? How old is it? Have you had it maintained? Was there an earthquake that caused your well? I would like to be able to get to that granular level of detail, because I believe that if you read what we were tasked with, that's what we were asked to do.
I agree.
And so I guess, Judy, you were the one at the last meeting who felt like we weren't supposed to talk about details.
I thought we were supposed to talk about this draft plan.
Right, and so
And I feel that talking about well construction is something for the TAC, not for the PAC.
Well, and I would counter that there are policy things like, let's say, should construction at all be considered? So I'm not saying what type of plastic, or if the steel is this type of steel or that type of steel, or what mill thickness it is or whatever. I'm just saying we can, from a broad level, look at policy type of questions, because if we're not going to, I don't see a reason to have another ad hoc meeting.
I have some questions. Does the GA board have a well registration form that is available to the domestic well owner, or even the mutual and co-op well owners? I know that the chairman of the Domestic Well Owners Association has put one together. You sent out an email to West, who sent it on to me about a postcard. What's happened to that? Because that's all part of.
I would think you would know, since your husband sent it to me. We have it.
The registration form?
Yes.
And are you going to use it?
Yes.
Good.
If you'd like, during member comment, I was going to give a little update on the postcard and where we're at with that.
Well, okay, but the registration form, Don should get up and speak for himself. The registration form has things like that on it. So if we're going to discuss that, to be educated, you guys need a copy of it.
Okay.
I kind of feel we're putting, with all these details you're talking about, Josh, and I understand why you're talking about them, but I think they're a little bit ahead of the game.
Well, some of the details are if a well goes dry east of Ridgecrest, should a Brown Road large ag pumper pay for it?
Well, that goes back to whether the mitigation fees go into the general pot, right?
Right, which is a funding question. So I'm saying details like that are appropriate policy level questions that I think we should have at our next ad hoc committee meeting.
Well, we can get more basic than that. We can say, are we going to divide the valley up into areas whereby the people on North Brown Road won't have anything to do with the people who are well owners that live south of China Lake Acres? I didn't even know there was a private well owner on the east side of the valley, by the way, till it was brought up today. But
I'm just saying I think those are appropriate policy level questions for us to ask that aren't technical questions, and so I think that we should have another ad hoc meeting, and I just wanted a little direction from this board that it's appropriate to talk about details.
Yeah, and I think the answer is, well, let me make sure that the rest of the group is in agreement with me. I'm happy we were asked to do this, and I think my understanding of what our tasking is now, and in talking about this agenda item and listing items B, C, and D, that's exactly what the GA would like us to do. And so, therefore, as long as we're willing to, we can reject a task. But to me, that's the task. I'll try to help clarify it as much as I can, and any questions that come up, I could. If you want, I could attend for that purpose to clarify and what level of detail you go down into is your thought and opportunity. But those three items, B, C, and D, you've completed A. B, C, and D are the ones that I think options, and options could include breaking it into or not. You could present both those options and maybe pros and cons of each, and then the funding options, the other discussion, and then out of this we could bring back the overall growth issue as well. So we get two things. The subcommittee meets again, goes through, goes to try to put more meat on the bones for B, C, and D. Meanwhile, the PAC overall would like to address the issue of how we take growth into consideration, the GA, and make recommendations similar for things to consider regarding growth, of which your item C may be one.
Dave, as far as growth, one thing I'd like to clarify for everybody. Anybody who wants to understand how this mitigation thing works, please just go to Wikipedia, look up mitigation, and they have a very, very good, description of how it works, businesses that surround it. It's spelled out. The other thing is, some of this stuff like well registration, I think you guys think you're the only ones that have ever done it. Really, it's been done a lot. And there are plenty of places, other states, other cities, other towns, you name it. They have very simple ways of getting registration accomplished. We haven't even talked about them. One of them is that a well is registered if it changes hands. If that property changes hands, it's registered. If a well is drilled, it's registered. If it has major improvements, it's registered after that. And some of the towns require every so many years that you have your water quality checked, just like you did when it was first drilled. You can't just use it for 50 years. You can use it for some number of years, and then it has to be checked because they want to know, did something infiltrate the well? And, are you feeding that to your family or something? At that time, that's put on, guess what? Your registry, which you have to have registered. So what they're saying by doing some of these things is every 10 years or whatever it is their code, every well has to, fall into the slot.
But that would be a county.
Yes, it would. And I would have liked to have said that in front of Lorelei because I think it is a county thing. And I think mitigation is a city thing. And the
Wait a
city
minute.
needs to take the time to bring that to their city council, discuss how
Oh,
they
you're
can do
talking
it.
about growth.
Okay, so
Yes.
we're getting a little off topic unless you're volunteering to be on the subcommittee.
She already
You
is on
already
the
are, so-
committee.
So I think it's that could be a part of your discussion.
I'm on the subcommittee.
You are, so that could be a part of the discussion.
Okay, David, I do not think, things that Pat just talked about, which are probably good ideas, like registering your well and having a water quality test every X number of years, that until the GA becomes a GSA and can pass rules, that would be under the purview of the County of Kern, the County of San Bernardino, and the County of Inyo. And do you feel that it's this policies committee's responsibility to offer things up to those three counties dealing with this?
Yes. Because we're the policy advisory committee to a board that has 3 members of those counties on them. We provide them with policy suggestions. They ignore them or take them. That's the literal definition of our community. We're a policy advisory committee.
Yes.
And as far as the city is concerned, excuse me, I'll turn myself back on. As far as asking the city to formulate a plan for mitigation, it'll take a little time. They very likely have to come up with a plan. They have to take it in front of their board. They have to come up with how they're going to do it. Are they going to put things in a general fund to accomplish this? What are they going to do?
It would also be, again, a county issue because growth doesn't just happen in the city.
If you're asking whether the PAC feels that's part of what we'd like the subcommittee to do, I think that's exactly what we're here for. And unless there's objections or from others or who think the subcommittee should not be doing that, I think we've outlined a two-pronged path forward. Address those issues, which would include for mitigation considerations for growth, and then ask to take on the growth issues separately. Member comment. I'm sorry, public comment.
Oh, thank you. Just briefly, I think the question of growth is an interesting topic that ought to be discussed. And then on the shallow well impacts, I thought Josh made some good points. I think this is a good discussion topic. And I would just suggest, if you're going to meet as an ad hoc, or even if you don't, bring back all your comments, put them in writing. Let's just bring it forward to you all as a PAC. I think there's no reason to shy away from putting the bullet points together and bringing it to the PAC, even if it's not something that everybody on the ad hoc agrees to. I think there are worthy points worth considering and talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Okay, so then we don't need a vote on this. Although we could go forward, I can report in the meeting that overall we like the memo. We have some minor changes plus some major flesh to be put on B, C, and D to continue the task, and also that we want to take on the growth issues separately.
Are we supposed to do A too?
You already did that.
You did?
Yeah, your first paragraph in your report says you like it with minor mods. But you didn't really complete B, C, or D, and you're going to continue to meet to do more of B, C, or D. B, C, and D.
I need a point of reference here. Which part of the outline are you referring to? You keep seeing B, C, and D, but you don't say the number. Is it 3?
Renee, those are actually the agenda items from last month's.
That was the tasker from last month's
this,
agenda item.
Yeah, no, but when that item's introduced, he's referring on the actual agenda. It's got that's like the first item, and then there's A, B, C, and D underneath.
Those were the tasks that the subcommittee was going to go do. A, B, C, D.
This is the agenda I have.
Last month's agenda.
Last month's agenda. I've got it right here. And I didn't make it clear enough. And as I said earlier, that's on me.
look at this real quick. Oh, A, B, C, and D, we're going from that? Okay. I thought you were going from this outline.
No, the A, B, and C, or D, C and D are what they asked us to do with regards to that outline.
Okay.
I propose we do it. And we'll segue into growth as a more general topic, and maybe, as you mentioned, suggest that it might be worthy of consideration on its own.
Do we need to vote on that? I don't think so. That's just going to be in the report. So I'll forward the first paragraph and then say we're working on B, C, or D, and we're going to add the growth topic separately. Okay. Is that it on that topic?
Yeah.
Okay, imported water update. We received no imported water update, although there was a piece of information related to that was given at the TAC meeting that I can forward, that our imported water consultants met with the Navy specifically. They met with the base NAVFAC public works officer and folks that work in that arena at that level with regards to that subject, imported water. So they are making plans. They've also had at least 2 meetings with potential sources that I'm aware of and are working actively. There's a memo been prepared, a situation paper, background paper that will be used to inform advocacy efforts at whatever level they choose to, and they're moving forward pretty quickly to see if imported water is feasible or not, and at what cost.
If I can add a little bit more to the meeting. So I know they met with David Pettijohn at LADWP. As you mentioned, they met with Navy, John and Commander Benson. This week they were supposed to go to Sacramento and meet with Shannon Grove and Vince Fong. Next week is the Association of California Water Agencies semiannual conference up in Monterey. They plan to be there on Thursday, and they've arranged meetings face-to-face with some potential partners for importing water. And then I believe later this month, I don't know a specific date yet or if it's been set, but they plan to go to Washington and meet with Kevin McCarthy and some others in Washington. So
yeah, they're meeting with also Congressman Cook, who covers Inyo County.
Right.
They have very good relationship with his office already, and the same with San Bernardino County officials at the county level and the federal representatives for that district as well are among the folks that they already have previously established relationships with.
Right, and they have had some preliminary discussions with Inyo County as well, and
right.
Intend to follow up with them at a later date.
And it's very interesting to me to note, given the hurdles we face with regards to imported water, that they have very strong connections at some pretty senior levels in a lot of areas that could potentially bear fruit in this discussion. Much of the federal advocacy is searching for funding, by the way.
I am very impressed with them, and as you remember, I was on the ad hoc committee that chose, and it's obvious from the meetings they've come to since they were chosen that they aren't sitting still. They're hard at work.
Now they have. I've met with them also in my other job, for full disclosure, that relates to that. So I think we're making good progress there. I think we probably hired the right folks, and we'll get an answer. Any public comment? Okay. We skipped that item, the imported water update, and went to number 8. Wrong agenda. I'm looking at the one I gave to Renee. Yeah, imported water update, future water. I didn't make a mistake. I was wrong. I made a mistake. We did the imported water update, future agenda items, the ones that I have already notified the PAC, the GA. Allocation status review and update, which should be anything that comes out of the next both any attorneys meetings and related items to number C, which would go back to if there's any change or discussion on the hydrological conceptual model and progress on the scenarios and outcome of the scenarios. Those would be under the third item listed there. And if we do have a draft Chapter 3 and maybe even a Chapter 2, we'll have those updates on there. Hopefully we will have, as we discussed tonight, a growth discussion. Are there any other potential additions to the next month's agenda that folks would like to put on it? That's a whole lot of meaty stuff right there. Oh, the ad hoc committee, subcommittee report on progress on BCD.
And I'd like to keep the agenda short enough that we have time to discuss each thing without, my bedtime coming. So.
Well, we've gone from where we were begging to have things to do to, holy cow, we got a lot to do.
Yeah.
And it's important stuff. Okay, public thoughts for additional?
I just want to, are we going to be covering this again? Is that going to be on the agenda?
The scenarios are part of number C, as they were this time. So any updates, that's what I meant, any updates out of the scenarios will be reported, and there should be, for certainly we'll have at least 2 by then. Okay. And we'll discuss essentially what the tax sees as well. Future meeting dates, next 3 months, June 6th. Reminder, June 27th is the replacement for the July 4th meeting, which would have been our regular one. It's moved back 1 week. It's moved a week earlier for clarity. So Thursday, June 27th, we have 2 meetings in June. We go back to our regular first Thursday, August 1st. So far, we have not needed a special meeting. There was talk today that the GA may need a special meeting just before the TAC and the PAC next time, based on getting the scenarios and having discussion and what they could release to the TAC and the PAC. So there could be a second GA meeting, but it would be a closed session meeting. So no change right now to our future meetings coming up. Open to member comment. Let's start, Tim.
No comment.
I would like to report that all of the well records that Pat Quist brought up last month are now in the hands of Stetson. They are going through them to copy the ones that they do not have.
Yeah, and I think they've already sent them in for copy. They've been delivered.
I also would like to report that as of yesterday, we are now a full board of 7.
Oh, good. I didn't follow you there for a second. You're talking East Kern. Yeah.
That's who I represent.
Right, understand. Raj.
So if you remember a couple of months ago, I brought up some questions regarding the modeling assumption and all that. So since then, I've given a pretty exhaustive list to Stetson's Jean
Moran.
And Jean Moran. And
she was at the TAC today.
Right. I don't follow these people, so I don't know where they are. But I don't have any replies so far. And then I'll be doing the same thing. I'll be looking at the isotopic hydrological sample analysis, and I'll be providing exhaustive comments to them again, with the hope that by January next year, at least there'll be some answers.
Okay.
No comment.
West?
Just one comment. I think there are going to be very important policy questions about helping to set minimum thresholds, particularly for domestic wells, for de minimis wells, and that might be something we might want to consider putting on our agenda sometime. What are the policy guidelines to help technically set minimum thresholds for de minimis wells?
Okay.
2 comments. You have a handout in front of you bearing today's date, my signature, 1 page. Extra copies are available for the public at the front counter. These are my questions to Stetson regarding the 3 model runs that we looked at up here. they're self-explanatory. It's why I didn't bring them up under agenda item 4, 6, and even under 9C. But Josh, I would request that you reference these under one of those and you attach them to the minutes if you would, please. Second comment, Donna Thomas, our former chairman, dropped by the house today in connection with Oasis Garden Club business. She is alive and well. She's back from 4 months in Maryland with her daughter. What else? She is continuing to systematically disengage from her many civic involvements and is feeling the better for it, I think, physically. And she is concentrating more of her time on her own personal health and other family issues. So I wanted you to report that, and that's
Great
it.
to hear.
I just want to make sure all the PAC members, make sure you have 2 different copies of minutes from me, the February 7th and the March. You might have gotten 2 copies of February by accident, so if you want to look before you leave.
I got an accidental copy.
You need,
I don't think I got
did get an
either.
accidental second copy.
do you need March or February?
I need March. I need March. Please.
And I need both. Thank you. Thank you.
I need March too.
Thank you.
Renee, I need March too.
Yeah, I have an extra,
Yeah.
an extra March for you and these things.
Anybody else? Everybody want March or February?
Any other comment, Renee?
February or March, if anyone needs them.
You need another you got 2 February. You need March.
Any other comment, Renee?
Anybody else? Okay, everybody's got March and February. Okay.
Nothing else, Renee?
That's it.
Okay. Patty?
Patty? Wow.
Pat, I'm
My
sorry.
mother called.
I'm
me
sorry.
that. I just hadn't heard it. In
It's
a
too.
long
It's past
time.
bedtime.
Wow. Yeah, that bedtime comment, you know. First of all, I'd like to thank Judy very, very much and the EKC RCD for scrounging up all those binders. They're heavy. It was a lot of work. I appreciate it very much. I'm very much in favor of having a historic log in one place. And then if we have it in other places, that's security. So I'm glad it's done. And there probably are other logs or other reports or talking with my hands here. Anything that could be archived with the GA, the Stetson, we have their ability right now to copy all these things. I think use that opportunity when we can, and eventually all those logs and reports will be in one place, and people can, go in and have a look at their own, look at something for research, or a student even could look at it. So I'm all in favor of it, and thank you, Judy, for making sure that happened. That was that was a lot of work, and I really appreciated it very, very much. That was pretty much it. I don't want to offend anybody by saying that Model 5 is bad, because actually you have to have the top and the bottom. I would just like to see us be working in the middle and really spend some serious time on what could come out of that. And having private meetings, unfortunately, they are necessary, and I really wish they weren't, but there you go. So, anyway.
Thank you, Pat. Don?
So at the April 18th board meeting, there was a direction given to perform some sort of outreach to the private well owners, the de minimis pumpers. A little confusion as to the direction from that board meeting, but you and I talked and we reviewed the video. And I drafted a postcard again, and including that postcard, I had a little introduction, and then I actually took the I believe it was 7 benefits that were identified by that ad hoc group that wrote up a little memo about outreach, copied and pasted that onto the postcard verbatim, and also referenced the well registration form that the domestic well owners provided. I had the opportunity, Mick Gleason and Ron Kosinski were in my office for a conference call. I had them go through it. They edited it, more so the introduction than the 7 bullets. I took that version, I sent it to Dave, and Dave, I understand you distributed it to, was it Judy, West, and Lyle?
The original subcommittee.
Okay.
Or, I'm sorry, the domestic well owners representatives.
Right. So we got your comments back. I incorporated them into another version, separate version, provided that back to Supervisor Gleason, Ron Kosinski, back to, you got it right, to Dave, and to Jim Worth. And I haven't got comments back. I should mention, too, that the well registration form, we went over it with Heather from Stetson and Steve Johnson. A few minor changes, nothing substantive. The intent and the verbiage on the postcard as it reads now is that it will be available on the IWV GA website to download. Understanding that not everybody has internet, we've been made aware of that. We would have hard copies at the Water District, and I was intending to drop some off at the Inyo Kern Community Services District office, if that's okay. Making it convenient, try and get it to where people can have access to it. But that's where we're at. I'm not sure I'll hear back by tomorrow. I'm going on vacation tomorrow afternoon, be gone for a week, so it probably won't go out. The other thing that's been going on, my staff has been looking at the list that we compiled to send the postcard out that went to all the parcel owners in Inyo, San Bernardino, Kern County, removing Water District customers and anybody else that we knew for sure wasn't a well owner. Chances are there'll be people that are going to get this card that don't have a well, and that's okay. But we're hoping to reach all the well owners and encourage them to fill out the form and register their wells.
I would like to relay a comment to everybody. Don and I, of course, talked to a lot of well owners, and we asked about the first postcard you sent out, and many people did not receive it. And we thought, why not? And we pushed a little further on them about their mail. We had a discussion about this at our ad hoc meeting, actually. It turns out that, unfortunately, at least the post office in Inyo Kern has a problem getting mail in the right mailboxes. And apparently there's also a problem getting the correct mail in people's mailboxes out in the country who have a standing mailbox. So I thought you should be aware of that. It's obviously not something that you have any control over, but I thought y'all needed to know it.
Short of making my staff mailmen, I don't think there's much we can do.
No, that's sad to hear, unfortunately.
Yes.
You do your best, and then...
Yeah. Appreciate the comment, though.
Thanks, Don.
I'd like to add a comment. Actually, I'd like to thank Don because he was able to send the cards to us in a very timely manner. And I think we worked directly with Audrey, our Trona manager, and they all went out. So she followed through, I think.
Thank you for distributing it, because we felt that customers over the Searles Domestic Water Company receive their water from here, so they should be aware of what's going on over here.
Good idea.
Yep, we have already gone. The card's gone. So.
Great.
One other thing, if I might, just real quick, I probably should have mentioned this at the GA board meeting, but there's a lot of hope in this valley that with the snowpack in the Sierra that we were going to be recipients of water like we were in 2017. I did contact LEDWP and I was told that no such luck. Snowpack was at 170% this year, 210, I think, in 2017. So they're not going to be dumping water or discharging water into this basin. I think there's more to it than that. Yeah. I've heard kind of through the grapevine that when they did discharge the water into this basin, Inyo County residents weren't very happy that their water was being discharged into Indian Wells Valley. So that could be a factor as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, because all the reports I heard was higher snowpack. So sad, but it is what it is. John?
Nothing.
The only comment I have to add is kudos to both of you for bringing it up last meeting on those the historic records, and for Judy to carry it out. Thank you very much, and congratulations to your board on being back up to full speed.
Oh, tell them.
So unless there are any objections, this meeting is adjourned.